In 1672, Romanian villagers buried Maria Popescu alive because she wouldn't stop bleeding. This wasn't murder, it was mercy. Because Maria had become Moroi, and the living dead don't deserve living graves. The soil above her moved for 3 days before going still. What you're about to discover isn't Dracula's Hollywood fantasy. It's the true story of Romania's living vampires, and why entire villages still perform rituals to keep them in their graves. Good evening, fellow listener. Picture this. You open your eyes in a Romanian village, somewhere between dream and nightmare, in the year 1751. You're 12 years old, and something is scratching inside the walls of your family's cottage. Not mice, not rats. Something with fingernails. Your grandmother crosses herself and whispers the word that makes your blood freeze. Moroi. But here's what makes this different from every vampire story you think you know. The Moroi isn't some pale aristocrat in a cape. It's your neighbour, Georg, who died 3 weeks ago from the wasting sickness, except he didn't stay dead. And he didn't rise from his grave either. He's trapped somewhere between life and death, and he's hungry for what he lost. The scratching grows louder. Your father checks the wooden crosses nailed above every window, touches the garlic braids hanging from the rafters, mutters prayers in Old Church Slavonic. But crosses and garlic aren't protection against Moroi, they're just wishful thinking. Because Moroi don't fear holy symbols. They were baptized Christians when they were alive. They know the prayers, know the saints, know exactly how God's protection works, and they know how to get around it. The scratching stops. In the silence, you hear something worse. Breathing. Slow, laboured breathing that sounds like it's coming through water, or through 6 feet of dirt. Your grandmother creeps to the window, peers through a crack in the shutters. When she turns back to you, her face has gone white as church candles. "He's standing in the yard," she whispers, still wearing his burial clothes, still covered in grave dirt, but his eyes... She can't finish the sentence. Because Georg's eyes are open, and they're looking directly at your window. This is the moment you realise that everything your village believes about death is wrong. Dead doesn't mean gone. Dead doesn't mean peaceful. Sometimes dead just means trapped to some, trapped between worlds, trapped between hunger and satisfaction, trapped between being human and being something else entirely. And trapped things, fellow listener, become very dangerous. But let's step back from that terrifying moment and understand what's really happening here. In medieval Romania, Moroi wasn't just a superstition. It was a medical diagnosis. Villagers had specific criteria for identifying someone who'd become Moroi after death. The signs were disturbingly specific. The body doesn't decay normally. The hair and nails continue growing. The skin remains soft and pink rather than turning grey. Sometimes witnesses reported the corpse would shift position in the coffin, or fresh blood would appear at the mouth. Modern forensic science explains these phenomena perfectly. Bodies buried in certain soil conditions, particularly clay-rich earth, can undergo adipocere formation, a soap-like substance that preserves tissue. Hair and nails don't actually grow after death, but as the skin shrinks, they appear longer. Decomposition gases can cause bodies to move or expel fluids that look like fresh blood. But medieval Romanians saw something else entirely. Proof that the dead person's soul hadn't properly departed. They were stuck, not alive, not dead, but something in between. And that something was very, very hungry. The hunger wasn't for blood, at least not originally. Moroi craved what they'd lost. Warmth, breath, the feeling of a beating heart. They would return to their families at night, trying to steal life force from the living. Victims would wake up exhausted, drained, slowly wasting away as the Moroi fed on their vitality. Here's where it gets truly disturbing. Romanian Orthodox theology actually supported this belief. The church taught that souls of the unbaptized, the excommunicated, or those who'd committed certain sins could become trapped in purgatorial states. The Moroi weren't demons, they were Orthodox Christians who'd become spiritually stuck. This wasn't some peasant superstition that the educated classes dismissed. Church records from the 17th and 18th centuries contain detailed instructions for identifying and dealing with Moroi. Priests blessed stakes specifically for piercing their hearts. Bishops authorised exhumations when multiple villagers reported Moroi attacks. The Romanian principalities even had laws governing Moroi incidents. If a family failed to properly settle their Moroi relative and it harmed neighbours, they could be held legally responsible. Villages kept official records of Moroi killings, complete with witness testimonies and clerical approvals. This wasn't folklore, this was bureaucracy, paperwork for the undead. Now here's the development that changes everything. You don't have to perish to become Moroi. In Romanian belief, certain living people could transform into Moroi while still breathing. Children born with teeth, people born on specific unlucky days, those with red hair or unusual birthmarks, anyone who had been cursed by someone departing this life. Most disturbingly, anyone who'd committed certain transgressions against their family or community. Let's follow one such case from the village records of Brașov, dated 1689. Ana Moldovan was accused of being living Moroi after her infant brother passed unexpectedly. The evidence? Anna had been born on a Saturday, considered unlucky. She had a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon. And on the night her brother departed, 3 neighbours claimed they saw her double, her spiritual form, prowling the village while her physical body lay sleeping at home. The village council convened. The priest testified about Anna's spiritual corruption. Her own parents, grief-stricken and desperate for someone to blame, agreed that their daughter had become something unnatural. Anna was 14 years old. The sentence was exile, but not the kind of exile we might imagine. Living Moroi couldn't simply be sent away, because their curse would follow them and spread to other communities. Instead, they were subjected to a ritual designed to bind their supernatural abilities. Anna was required to remove her clothing and crawl through a series of wooden hoops, while the entire village chanted prayers. Her head was shaved and her scalp marked with holy oil in the sign of the cross. Finally, she was made to drink a mixture of holy water and her own blood, sealing the binding spell. But it didn't end there. Anna was required to wear specific clothing, always a red sash around her waist, always iron jewellery, never anything made from animal hide. She couldn't enter churches, she couldn't touch expecting women or newborn children, she couldn't participate in harvest festivals or wedding celebrations. Essentially, she became a living ghost in her own community, and if anyone else in the village passed unexpectedly, Anna would be blamed again. The binding might be declared ineffective. The punishment might escalate to something more permanent. Here's where Romanian history takes a turn toward the truly horrific, because the most famous Romanian of all time, Vlad the Impaler, the historical Dracula, weaponized Moroi beliefs for psychological warfare. Vlad understood something that modern psychological warfare experts would later rediscover. The most effective terror isn't random violence, it's violence that taps into existing cultural fears. And in 15th century Romania, nothing was more terrifying than the idea of the unquiet dead. When Vlad impaled his enemies on wooden stakes, he wasn't just executing them, he was creating artificial Moroi. The stakes prevented proper burial rites. The exposed bodies couldn't be blessed by priests or visited by grieving families. In Romanian belief, this meant their souls would become trapped, unable to move on to the afterlife. But Vlad went further. He would sometimes leave impaled enemies alive for days, letting them die slowly. From a distance, these writhing figures looked exactly like how people imagined Moroi caught between life and death, unable to resin, making inhuman sounds of suffering. Ottoman records describe Turkish soldiers refusing to advance through the forest of the impaled, not because of the smell or the horror, but because they believed the area was cursed with restless spirits. Vlad had turned military execution into supernatural terrorism. The psychological impact was devastating. Entire enemy armies would retreat rather than march through areas where Vlad had created his artificial Moroi. The fear wasn't just of death, it was of spiritual contamination, of becoming trapped like those poor souls writhing on stakes. If you're finding these dark truths about Romanian folklore as fascinating and disturbing as I am, hit that like button and subscribe for more content that reveals the brutal realities behind our most enduring myths. Comment below if you have ever visited Romania. I'm particularly curious if you've seen any of the protective symbols we're about to discuss. Bonus points if you can name the specific type of wood traditionally used for anti-Moroi stakes. Now, let's return to those villages where the dead still walk. The rituals to protect against Moroy were as elaborate as they were disturbing, and many are still practiced today in rural Romania. Every Romanian Orthodox church contains what's called a Moroi cabinet, a locked wooden box containing tools blessed specifically for undead encounters. Stakes of different woods for different types of supernatural entities, hawthorn for standard Moroi, ash for those who'd committed suicide, oak for those who'd been excommunicated, and iron nails, blessed on Good Friday for the most dangerous cases. But the real protection happened at the family level. Romanian households developed intricate nightly rituals designed to keep Moroy from entering. These weren't simple prayers or holy symbols, they were complex magical procedures that combined Christian elements with much older traditions. Before bed, the head of household would walk the perimeter of their property 3 times counterclockwise, sprinkling salt mixed with holy water and crushed garlic. Each window and door would be marked with specific symbols drawn in blessed oil, not crosses, but older protective sigils that predated Christianity in the region. Inside the house, the family would gather around the hearth for the evening binding. Each family member would tie a red thread around their left wrist while reciting the names of all deceased relatives, asking them to stand guard against any unquiet dead who might be wandering. The threads would be buried at sunrise, carrying the night's spiritual dangers into the earth where they belonged. Children were taught never to look out windows after sunset without first covering their eyes with iron, a coin, a nail, even a piece of jewellery. The belief was that Moroy could establish spiritual connections through eye contact, even through glass. Once connected, they could drain life force from a distance. But the most chilling ritual involved mirrors. Every Romanian household would cover all mirrors after someone died, not just out of mourning, but from genuine terror. Moroy could use reflective surfaces as spiritual doorways, stepping from the realm of the dead into the world of the living. The mirrors would remain covered for 40 days, the time Orthodox theology claimed it took for souls to reach their final destination. If someone forgot and looked in an uncovered mirror during this period, they might see more than their own reflection. They might see the face of the recently deceased standing behind them, reaching out from the world beyond. What makes this story truly disturbing is that it didn't end with the medieval period. In fact, some of the most documented cases of Moroy incidents happened in the 20th century. In 953, the newly installed communist government of Romania ordered investigations into persistent feudal superstitions in rural areas. What they found shocked even hardened party officials. Entire villages were still conducting regular Moroy prevention rituals. Local party representatives discovered graves that had been secretly reopened and modified with stakes, garlic, or positioning changes. The most documented case involved the village of Moroy de Snooze, where villagers had exhumed and destroyed what they believed were 17 different Moroy over a 10-year period. When communist investigators arrived, they found detailed records kept by the village priest. Names, dates, methods used, and witness testimonies for each incident. Dr. Maria Popescu, the government anthropologist assigned to investigate, was initially skeptical, but his interviews with villagers revealed a consistent pattern that troubled him. In every case, the person accused of becoming Moroy had died during or shortly after periods of unusual stress in the community, crop failures, disease outbreaks, political upheavals. The Moroy incidents weren't random superstitions. They were a community's way of processing trauma, of finding someone to blame when unexplained deaths clustered together. The supposed supernatural threat provided a target for grief and fear that might otherwise have torn the community apart. But Dr. Popescu discovered something else that shook his materialist worldview. In several cases, the graves identified as containing Moroy showed signs of unusual preservation. Bodies that should have been skeletal after years in the ground were found in states of remarkable intactness. The very phenomenon that had convinced villagers of supernatural activity had a scientific explanation, but the science was still mysterious enough to be genuinely unsettling. Most disturbing of all, Dr. Popescu found that the communist government's attempts to suppress Moroy beliefs only drove them underground. Villagers continued the rituals secretly, passing knowledge to their children through whispered stories rather than open teaching. The fear became more intense because it became forbidden. Let's shift perspective entirely. You're no longer the terrified child hiding from scratching sounds. You're Ana Moldovan, the 14-year-old girl accused of being a living Moroi. It's been 3 years since your brother died, and your community declared you cursed. You wake every morning to the sight of iron nails hammered into your bedroom windowsill. Protection against you, not for you. You wear the red sash that marks you as spiritually dangerous. Children cross themselves when they see you coming. Adults speak in whispers after you pass. The worst part isn't the fear in their eyes, it's the certainty. They know you're cursed. They've seen the evidence, felt the supernatural dread in your presence. When Vasily's old cow died last month, they found scratches on the barn door and immediately looked to you. When Maria's baby was born with a withered arm, everyone remembered that you had walked past her house during her pregnancy. You start to question your own memories. Did you dream of flying last Tuesday night? Or did your spirit actually leave your body? When you touched that dying bird and it suddenly flew away, was that kindness or was that your curse accidentally working in reverse? The line between imagination and supernatural reality blurs when everyone around you insists the supernatural is real. 3 years of this isolation, and you've begun to notice things. You do feel different. Stronger, maybe. More aware of people's emotions, their fears, their hidden thoughts. When you look at someone, you can sense their vitality, almost see their life force flowing through their body like warm light. Is this the curse developing, or is this what happens to anyone who spends years being treated like a monster? Do you have supernatural powers? Or have you simply learned to read human nature with the sharp attention of someone whose survival depends on understanding the moods of those who might destroy her? In 2004, Romanian archaeologists working near Cluj made a discovery that sent shockwaves through both the academic community and local villagers. They uncovered a 16th century cemetery with clear evidence of systematic anti-vampire practices. 14 skeletons showed signs of post-mortem modification. Hearts removed and replaced with stones. Skulls positioned face down to prevent the dead from seeing their way back to the living world. Most chilling of all, several skeletons had been pinned to their coffins with iron spikes driven through the chest, pelvis and ankles. But it was the DNA analysis that revealed the most disturbing truth. 7 of the 14 modified skeletons belonged to children under the age of 16. Radiocarbon dating confirmed they had died during a plague outbreak in 1574. The modifications had been performed within days of their deaths, while grief-stricken families were still determining who to blame for the disease. The evidence painted a horrific picture. As plague swept through the village, desperate parents had turned on their own children's corpses, convinced that the dead were somehow responsible for spreading the disease to the living. Dr. Maria Popescu, the lead archaeologist, found herself in an ethical dilemma. Local villagers petitioned to have the remains reburied immediately with proper Orthodox rites. They believed the archaeological excavation had awakened the Moroy, pointing to a series of unexplained deaths in the area since the dig began. The Romanian Orthodox Church supported the villagers' request. Even government officials, officially committed to secular rationality, privately admitted they were uncomfortable with keeping the remains in research facilities. Dr. Popescu agreed to rebury the remains but insisted on one condition: full documentation of the anti-vampire modifications before reinterment. What she discovered challenged her understanding of both medieval medicine and human psychology. The modifications weren't random violence or superstitious mutilation. They followed precise anatomical knowledge that suggested the practitioners understood circulation, decomposition, and even some principles of what we now call forensic pathology. The stone hearts were positioned to prevent bloating that might make corpses appear alive. The facial positioning prevented death reflexes that could cause eyes to open days after burial. These weren't ignorant peasants destroying bodies in supernatural panic. These were informed practitioners applying sophisticated techniques to solve what they perceived as a medical crisis. They were wrong about the supernatural cause, but their method showed a detailed understanding of human anatomy. The energy begins to soften now, preparing for sleep. In modern Romania, you can still find villages where old women sell Moroi kits, small leather pouches containing blessed salt, iron nails, and specific herbs for protection against the restless dead. Tourist shops in Brașov and Cluj market them as folklore curiosities, but the women selling them aren't joking. They remember their grandmother's stories. They remember unexplained deaths, mysterious illnesses, the sound of scratching in walls that stopped only when proper rituals were performed. To them, the communist government's mockery of superstition and the modern world's dismissal of folklore doesn't change what they've seen with their own eyes. Father Dumitru, a priest I spoke with in a village outside Sibiu, told me something that haunts me still. The young people think we're foolish for blessing stakes and keeping iron nails in the church, but when someone dies unexpectedly, when children start having nightmares about the recently deceased, when animals refuse to go near certain graves, they come to me, and I do what needs to be done, because belief makes things real in ways that science cannot measure. He showed me the church's Moroi cabinet, still maintained, still used. The blessed stakes looked ancient, darkened with age and handled smoothly. The iron nails were newer, purchased from modern hardware stores, but blessed according to medieval rituals. Every few years, he said, someone comes to me convinced their dead relative has become Moroi. I could tell them it's grief, trauma, misunderstood natural phenomena, but that's not what they need to hear. They need to know their spiritual world still has defenders. As sleep approaches, let these questions drift through your mind. What creates a Moroi? Medieval Romanians believed it was spiritual corruption, unfinished business, or divine punishment. Modern psychology suggests it was community trauma, scapegoating, and the human need to find meaning in random tragedy. But what if both explanations are true? What if Moroi are real, but not in the way anyone expects? Your breathing slows as we explore these final mysteries. Consider this. In every culture that believes in restless dead, the description is remarkably similar. Something that was once human, but has become trapped between states of existence. Something that hungers for what it has lost. Something that can only be stopped by very specific actions performed by living people who understand the rules of spiritual combat. Maybe Moroi aren't supernatural creatures. Maybe they're psychological phenomena that become real through collective belief. The scratching in the walls isn't a dead person's fingernails. It's the sound of a community's guilt and fear manifesting in ways that feel supernatural, but emerge from purely human psychology. Your eyes grow heavy as these ancient questions swirl through consciousness, or maybe, in a universe stranger than we admit, the medieval Romanians understood something we've forgotten. Maybe consciousness is more flexible than modern science assumes. Maybe death is more of a process than an event. Maybe the boundary between life and death, between individual mind and collective belief, is more porous than we're comfortable acknowledging. In rural Romania, in villages where the old ways survive beneath modern life, grandmothers still teach their grandchildren how to recognize the signs, how to protect themselves, how to help the dead find peace and the living find safety from those who can't. They don't do this because they're backward or superstitious. They do it because they remember when forgetting such knowledge meant entire communities could be torn apart by forces they couldn't understand or control. The scratching in your walls grows fainter as sleep approaches. Tonight, somewhere in Romania, an old woman will walk counterclockwise around her property, sprinkling salt mixed with holy water. Somewhere else, a family will cover their mirrors because someone died this week. And in a village near the Carpathian Mountains, a priest will bless stakes and iron nails just in case. Because Moroi, whether real or imagined, supernatural or psychological, are still out there. Still trapped between states of existence, still hungry for what they've lost, and the living still remember how to send them home. Sweet dreams.